Some people think of organized labor in association with picketing during strikes and with violence. To others, it means labor management conflict. Labor's idea about management, management's idea about labor. In fact, organized labor is the collective voice with which 18 million union members speak, 1/4 of the total working population of our country. What were the historic conditions that led to the rise of organized labor? Before the Industrial Revolution, the employer and worker knew each other personally in the small workshops. But with the introduction of machines in the factories, as not every man can own a machine, those who do not own machines have to work for those who do. But this means, in effect, that the machine has created new social groupings, among others, the industrialist and the worker. Under the factory system, the worker was considered expendable. He had no rights except the right to work until his health gave out. His wages were miserably low, his hours destructively long, from sunup to sundown, 6 days a week. In the early 1800s, he had little energy left for his family life. The hiring of women in the factories, who were driven to work even longer hours for lower wages, further threatened the working man's livelihood. And the children. In 1900, it was common to find children working in the mines, the farms, the factories, and the canneries. 6-year-olds were canning vegetables until 2 o'clock in the morning, perpetually hungry, their wages barely enough to keep them alive. The working conditions in America throughout the 19th century were incredible. Many factories were dark, filthy, and unhygienic. Machines often death traps without safety devices. And these things happened not primarily from the greed and cruelty of the employer, but because he had to meet increasing competition, because it was a period of transition into a machine age. And as more workers became absorbed into the factory system, the conflict sharpened between employer and wage earner. Workers began to act together against the industrialist for self-protection and even survival. The individual worker discovered that only through joining unions could he gain power and dignity. Workers realized gradually that in union there is strength. In union, there is achievement in the form of better wages, shorter hours, better working conditions, and job security. In union, there is the equalization in bargaining power between industrialist and worker. The worker wanted the right to face the industrialist not as a benevolent father, but as an equal. The struggle of the workers to achieve these rights through union began in colonial days. In 1786, one of the earliest strikes of workers in a single trade occurred in Philadelphia. The printers struck and gained a minimum wage of $6 a week. By the 1790s, the shoemakers had formed their craft union, but these early unions were very unpopular. The courts were unsympathetic, ruling them to be secret and illegal conspiracies. For example, the journeyman bootmakers were indicted and brought to trial for trying to raise their wages. They were found guilty. It was not until 1842 that Justice Lemuel Shaw of Massachusetts ruled that labor unions were legal organizations and not conspiracies. But this applied only to Massachusetts. Other American courts continued to follow English law by treating unions as conspiracies in restraint of trade. They reasoned that when workers formed a union to raise wages, they were conspiring to injure the public by forcing employers to do something against their will. The first successful national labor union was formed in 1869. It was the Knights of Labor and was founded by Uriah Stephens and led by Terrence Powderly. By 1886, when the Knights of Labor moved into its new headquarters, it had 700,000 members in scores of trades, headed by Powderly and a national committee. It welcomed to its ranks all persons from all branches of honorable toil, provided they were over 16, excluding only sellers of liquor, professional gamblers, bankers, stockbrokers, lawyers, and doctors. But the broadness of its membership was its ultimate weakness. Powderly and the Knights of Labor could not represent so many groups with such opposing interests. It became involved in more strikes than it could effectively handle, and it soon disintegrated under the pressures of its own internal conflicts. In the 1880s, as the Knights of Labor was declining in power, the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, was being formed. In 1886, Samuel Gompers became its first president. It was a loose-knit organization made up of independent unions. Gompers was shrewd enough to learn from the mistakes of the past. He realized that one of two roads was open to American labor. The first way, followed by some radical labor leaders, was to try to disrupt and destroy the capitalist system by violence, because it seemed responsible for so many ills and inequalities. This was the philosophy of the German economist Karl Marx. They believed that capitalism was ethically unjust and economically unsound. They concentrated so much on their desire to overthrow the system that they had little energy left for improving the worker's life under existing conditions. Some even believed that the more miserable the lot of the worker, the sooner he would revolt. The second way, followed by Gompers and the majority of labor, was to accept capitalism, but to try to improve working conditions. The AFL was devoted to pure and simple unionism, which meant no revolutionary change. Instead, the AFL concerned itself with its members' wages and working conditions. They placed great stress on organizing the skilled craftsmen, the most important workers at this time, and grew rapidly in strength. The main fight of the AFL was to gain the right of the union to bargain for its individual members with management. At this time, social reform groups seeking social justice became interested in labor's problems, and they urged government intervention to improve the lot of the working man. By the turn of the 20th century, the public had to be educated to the idea that unions were not contrary to the American spirit of rugged individualism, but a necessary and integral part of democratic capitalism. And management had yet to learn that unions were not depriving them of their right of free enterprise, but rather were a part of that very way of life that made free enterprise possible. At first, management used every means in its power to destroy the unity and strength of labor. Lockouts deprived men of their right to work. Blacklists discriminated against labor unions or those who voiced their opinions. Spies to ferret out the nonconformists. Strong-arm men to beat them back into line. Management fought legal battles in the courts, having some unions fined, the leaders imprisoned. Labor fought back. Then in 1914, the Clayton Anti-Trust Act gave labor one of its greatest victories. Congress declared that human labor is not a commodity or article of commerce, and that organized labor is a legal American institution. The 1930s marked another turning point in American labor history. The administration of Franklin Delano Roosevelt recognized labor's important position, and Congress passed the National Labor Relations Act of 1935, called the Magna Carta of Labor. This act guaranteed labor's right to organize and to choose by secret ballot which union would bargain for them. Labor's rights were to be elaborately guarded by the National Labor Relations Board. The stage was set for organized labor's phenomenal growth. But the craft unions, major groups in the AFL, were exclusively for the skilled workers. They were not open to those thousands of unskilled and semi-skilled in the expanding automotive, steel, rubber, and other heavy industries. These men posed an acute problem for the AFL. In the 1930s, millions of workers were looking for union representation. Bitter dissension arose as to how to organize these men. Many AFL members feared that by opening their own ranks to thousands of unskilled workers like these, they might lose their own jobs. This difference of opinion led to a split. By 1938, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, known as the CIO, was formed under the leadership of John L. Lewis of the United Mine Workers and Sidney Hillman of the Amalgamated Clothing Workers. For the next 20 years, the CIO fought its battles independently. But this is a century of mergers. Business was now consolidating, labor likewise. With the emergence of new leaders such as George Meany, former president of the AFL here on the left, and Walter Reuther, former president of the CIO on the right, the AFL and CIO combined in 1955 to form the greatest labor organization in American history, the AFL-CIO. But this merger has not eliminated all of labor's problems. It has two internal enemies, racketeers and communists. Today, communists are puppets of Soviet policy. They publish books and pamphlets which follow the Soviet line. A major goal of the Communist Party has been to infiltrate and control the American labor movement. They have not been successful, although they did manage to control a small number of unions. Labor's second enemy is racketeering. Originally, to intimidate labor, some cruel and short-sighted managements hired strong-arm men to beat up labor leaders and break strikes. Labor, equally short-sighted but with some justification, felt that to survive, it must meet force with force. It employed thugs of its own. Later, some gangsters became union leaders who could be bought off for a price. Many employers tolerated and collaborated with the racketeers, finding it less costly to pay off the racketeer than to bargain legitimately with an honest union. From time to time, congressional committees such as this Senate Select Subcommittee on Improper Activities in Labor or Management have investigated these abuses. Here's the committee's attorney questioning Teamster Union leader Jim Hoffa about his gangster associations.
Did you ever talk with him at that time?
Yes?
About what?
I think general conversation.
Well, what about?
I just don't.
Recollect?
I don't recollect. I'll tell you why. I was in New York to appear in front of the grand jury. A lot of things on my mind. Since then, I've had a lot of things on my mind, and I don't recollect what I talked about to him. I don't think it was important.
What hotel was it?
I can't tell you, sir.
Did he go up in the elevator with you?
I don't know.
Well, do you know if he went to your room?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
Can't remember back now. This is 3 months. You can't remember 3 months ago whether Johnny Deere was in your room? The man who's under indictment for throwing acid in Victor Rizal's eyes?
I cannot remember whether he was or not. As I said, it was that period of time, and I just don't recall.
You can't remember what you talked about, and you can't remember whether he was in your room?
Wouldn't have been of anything of any importance, Mr. Kennedy, and I can't recall it.
And so it went on. It may appear strange that a union membership will re-elect a man accused of racketeering. Unfortunately, if he has fought a strong fight for some improvements, and his union has shared in the general gains achieved by the whole force of organized labor, his own police record may be overlooked. This was so with union boss Hoffa. The place, then, of organized labor within our economic system should be evaluated within the perspective of history. A labor leader or a union charged with corruption does not mean that organized labor is evil, just as a ruthless industrialist does not make capitalism a heartless system. Today, responsible labor leaders are keenly aware that labor must clean its own house. Labor's sense of responsibility is growing to match the power it has gained through collective bargaining. Labor's record of achievements is impressive. It can take credit for helping to establish our free public school system, better working conditions, fairer wages, and a working week reduced from 80 to 40 hours. Fringe benefits such as paid vacations, pensions, and insurance supported by management. Union bank and credit facilities. Research departments that study business trends. Technical and trade schools. Union-operated summer resorts. Union medical centers and cooperative medical programs, and union-financed apartment houses. Today, unions themselves have become big business. They've accumulated millions of dollars in their health, welfare, and retirement funds, and they've invested enormous funds in the stocks and bonds of American business. The rise of organized labor is as important as the rise of the great corporation. Each represents different sides of the coin that we call democratic capitalism, and each has a stake in our system. We still have strikes, but violence in labor disputes is becoming increasingly rare. Contracts are usually faithfully kept by both sides, and in case of disputes, there's a growing acceptance of mediation or arbitration in which an impartial umpire helps settle the issues. Today, organized labor is a major political and economic force in our country. From the time of Samuel Gompers, American labor has not favored the formation of its own national political party. It does, however, support Democrat and Republican candidates who show friendship to its aims and opposes others it considers anti-labor. With power comes responsibility. How does labor feel about its present and future role in American society? Here is George F. Meany, president of the Afl-Cio, to tell us.
In the future, as in the past, the American labor movement is determined to promote both the best interests of its members and of our country. We intend to improve workers' living conditions, the welfare of workers' families, and the general public welfare, both through collective bargaining and legislation. To do that, we must have a clean and democratic movement, and the Afl-Cio has proven its determination to live up to that standard. We will not advocate or support policies which aid workers at the expense of the general public, for we believe that no group in our land should prosper through policies which injure others. Our goals, however, are not just economic. We want to improve educational opportunities in our land, eliminate poverty, suffering, and unemployment, achieve better housing and medical care for all people, eliminate discrimination, provide for our older workers in their twilight years, promote cultural standards, provide for the new leisure which is certain to come with automation. In brief, we want to make our land even greater and stronger and better than ever.
The American people and its government will be watching to see if organized labor uses its great power in the best interests of both its members and the general public. What happens is important to us all.